Despite being a legendary franchise, we haven't seen a modern AAA 007 game in quite some time, but that finally changes with the arrival of 007 First Light. This game comes from IO Interactive, the developer behind the most recent Hitman games. And with First Light, they are trying to blend the social stealth and open-ended mission design from Hitman with some action-adventure elements and set pieces reminiscent of Naughty Dog's Uncharted series. And to support this more ambitious direction and larger scope project, IO Interactive has made several major upgrades to its in-house Glacier engine. The most noticeable upgrade is the new probe-based software ray-traced global illumination, which does an excellent job of simulating indirect lighting and light bounces across surfaces. While this solution relies heavily on screen space information, which can lead to occasional disocclusion artifacts, it remains stable and free from the temporal noise we've seen in many recent games. The game also features a new unified volumetric system called Smolder, which handles a wide range of volumetric effects and becomes especially noticeable during explosions and chaotic moments, where it adds a lot of visual depth. However, it's also quite demanding and can lead to noticeable performance drops, which ties into a broader issue with the game's scalability. First Light offers only a limited number of graphics settings that scale poorly. Even when moving from the lowest to the highest settings, the differences are surprisingly small in both visual quality and performance. Usually in games with limited scalability like this, upscaling becomes a more important tool for improving performance than tweaking the graphics settings. And 007 First Light supports both DLSS and FSR3, but unfortunately, at least on the performance side, DLSS does not quite behave as expected. Image quality-wise, DLSS provides a much sharper and more stable image even when compared to native TAA. However, performance-wise, it's surprisingly heavy, offering only a small uplift over TAA, and it performs significantly worse than FSR3. Even when falling back to the older CNN-based preset E, the performance gains are still nowhere near what FSR3 delivers. So if you are looking for a meaningful performance boost through upscaling in this game, there are only two practical options to consider. Either use FSR3 quality mode, which to be honest does not look great, or the better option is DLSS performance mode. And if you are on an RTX 20 or 30 series GPU, make sure to force preset K through the NVIDIA app or tools like Upscaling, since 007 First Light follows NVIDIA's latest guidelines, using preset K for quality and balance modes, preset M for performance, and preset L for ultra performance. One thing to note is that at ultra performance, textures can become noticeably blurry, likely due to an incorrect or missing negative LOD bias adjustment. Because of that, I highly recommend avoiding ultra performance mode. Now let's move on to the graphics settings, starting with texture quality. This one is straightforward and controls the quality of the game's textures and assets. And as is often the case with this setting, each step increases VRAM usage, as you can see here at 1440p using DLAA. Speaking of VRAM, on the 8GB 36C Ti at 1440p with FSR3 quality, VRAM usage looks normal even with high and ultra textures. But high introduces noticeable frame time spikes, while ultra leads to a clear performance drop and increased system RAM usage. Because of that, if you have an 8GB GPU, I recommend keeping texture quality at medium. As for texture filtering, it behaves exactly as expected. It has a noticeable impact on image quality while carrying a negligible performance cost, so I recommend keeping it at 16x. Next, we have level of detail. This one controls the mesh quality and draw distance of various objects across the game. And in this car driving sequence, we can see that popping is not noticeable even when used low. Performance-wise, there is a small 5 to 6% cost even when going from low to ultra. But in this scene, the cost is slightly higher at around 4% from low to high and 9% when going up to ultra. So overall, I recommend keeping level of detail at medium. Moving up to terrain quality, this one affects the quality of virtual texturing used on terrain surfaces. We can see a noticeable improvement in terrain textures when going from low to medium, while the difference between medium, high, and ultra is barely noticeable. Performance-wise, this setting has almost no impact on frame rate, as it mainly affects VRAM usage. In this particular scene, the VRAM difference isn't very noticeable. But in other areas like this one, there is a much larger increase when using the higher options. Therefore, I recommend keeping terrain quality at medium, especially if you are VRAM limited. Let's move on to shadow quality. This one adjusts the quality and the resolution of the game's shadow maps. While Ultra does reduce some of the flickering on shadows, it does not completely eliminate it. And in crowded areas, Low removes the shadows of almost all the crowds, while also reduces self-shading on Bound and other characters. And the performance impact of this setting varies depending on the scene. In this example, there is only a small difference between medium, high, and ultra, with roughly an 8% cost when moving up from low, along with a noticeable increase in VRAM usage at each step. However, in other scenes, there is a much clearer distinction between the higher options. So for this setting, I recommend medium, and if you have enough performance and VRAM to spare, use ultra. Next, we have volumetric fog quality. This setting mainly affects the quality of atmospheric effects, such as light shafts, with each step slightly improving the definition and clarity of these effects. Despite the relatively subtle visual differences, the performance cost is quite noticeable. Here we see around a 2% cost from low to medium, 8% to high, and 12% when going further to ultra. So for this one, I recommend medium. Moving up to volumetric effects quality, this setting adjusts the quality of Smolder, the game's unified volumetric system, which handles effects such as fire, smoke, and other particle-based effects. Here we can see very little visual difference between the options, with Ultra showing only slightly less breakup and costing around 8% performance-wise. But where this setting makes a bigger difference is on generated particles, especially close to the camera, like this smoke effect, where high and particularly ultra can lead to a much larger performance hit. So for this one, I recommend sticking with low or medium to minimize performance drops during intense combat scenarios. Let's move on to global illumination quality. This one controls the quality of the game's software RTGI. Visually high and ultra provide more accurate and direct lighting with improved local light bounds and better ambient shadowing. Performance-wise, there is little to no noticeable difference between the options in most areas. But there are few scenes like this one where high and ultra show roughly a 5 to 6% performance cost compared to low and medium. Even so, I recommend keeping global illumination at high or ultra. Lastly, we have reflection quality. 007 First Light uses three different reflection techniques. First, there are cube map reflections, which are mainly used on some transparent surfaces. And as you can see here, this setting has no impact on them. Next, we have screen space reflections, which are used on water, puddles, vehicles, and some other reflective surfaces. Here we can see a slight visual difference in the self-reflection on this boat when using high and ultra. Finally, there are planar reflections, which we've seen before in Hitman games. These are primarily used on mirrors, and this is where this setting makes a big difference both visually and performance-wise. So despite the performance cost, I recommend keeping reflection quality at high, since it adds a lot visually to the game while remaining mostly situational and only really causes a noticeable performance hit when looking directly at mirrors from up close. So given everything we've discussed so far, these are my recommended settings for 007 First Light. Let's compare the performance of the optimized settings against Ultra at 1440p using medium textures. Now throughout the video, you might have noticed some screen tearing and occasional hitching. That's because this game doesn't seem to play well with my Elgato capture card. I tried using VSync and VRR, but I could not completely eliminate the tearing. Anyway, as expected and as we discussed earlier, in this game it's not easy to achieve large performance gains just by tweaking settings while still maintaining good image quality. Here on average, we can see around a 20% performance improvement when using the optimized settings alongside FSR3 quality, while using the DLSS performance preset K reduces that to around 9%. And here in this scene, there is around an 11% gain when using optimized settings with DLSS performance and about an 18% gain when using optimized settings with FSR3 quality. Before ending the video, I want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon. If you are able and would like to directly support my work, consider becoming a patron to get early access to my optimized settings, as well as downloads of the highest possible quality of my latest videos, including this one. And a big thank you to all my supporters, and thank you as well for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and if not, leave a dislike. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.